It was a quiet, sunlit morning in October when the engines thundered into the small town of Cedar Hollow, shattering the stillness that usually hung over the lonely roadside diner on Route 9. The rumble grew louder until the windows trembled and every head turned as a dozen bikers pulled into the gravel lot, their black leather jackets reflecting the sharp morning light. Among them was their leader, Jack Doyle, a man whose name carried weight far beyond the rumbling of his Harley-Davidson. His presence commanded silence the moment his boots hit the gravel. He was the kind of man who looked carved from granite, with eyes that spoke of 1,000 miles of roads and regrets he never talked about. People in 3 counties whispered stories about him. Some feared him, others respected him, but no one truly knew the man behind the scars and faded tattoos. If you believe that kindness can come from the most unexpected hearts, that everyone deserves a second chance, then please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner, where real stories of compassion come alive. Inside the diner, the clinking of coffee cups faded as the bikers filed into the corner booths. The waitress, her name tag read Ellie, moved quietly between tables, her smile polite but worn thin. She was young, maybe 28, with tired eyes that carried the weight of too many sleepless nights. When she leaned forward to pour coffee for Jack, he noticed something beneath her attempt at cheer, a faint bruise near her collarbone, half hidden by the collar of her uniform, the kind that no amount of concealer could fully erase. It wasn't the first time he'd seen something like that. It stirred memories of his past, the kind of past that still haunted him when the nights grew too long and too quiet. Ellie worked in silence, keeping her eyes low. Her hands trembled slightly as she set a plate down in front of him. Jack's gaze lingered, not with anger, but with a quiet, aching concern. He didn't say a word, but inside, something shifted, a slow-burning fury mixed with a grief he hadn't let himself feel in years. He saw himself in her fear. Years ago, he'd lost someone he loved to the same kind of pain, the kind no one spoke about at dinner tables, the kind hidden behind closed doors and forced smiles. That memory had been buried under layers of road dust and roughness. But now, standing before this frightened waitress, it clawed its way back to the surface. Outside, the sky turned the color of wet slate, and the wind began kicking dust across the gravel lot. The other bikers laughed among themselves over eggs and burnt coffee, but Jack wasn't listening. He watched Ellie slip into the back kitchen, her shoulders slumped like she was trying to disappear. He followed her with his eyes and noticed how she flinched when the manager, a stocky man everyone called Kurt, barked an order from across the counter. Kurt had a mean set to his jaw and eyes that burned with a quiet, practiced cruelty. In that moment, everything became clear to Jack. Hours later, when the lunch crowd thinned to nothing, Jack lingered alone at the counter, pretending to nurse the last of his coffee. He watched Kurt walk past Ellie, shouldering her hard enough to make her spill a full pot. She whispered an apology. Kurt's response was sharp, low, venomous, the kind of words meant to be heard by no one but her. Jack's jaw tightened. There was no mistaking it now. This wasn't just stress. This was fear, the kind that traps a person in silence for years. That night, Jack couldn't shake the image of her bruised collarbone. He sat alone in his garage back home, the neon beer sign flickering across rows of chrome and steel, lost in thought. His brothers from the club stopped by, joking and loud as always, but he barely heard a word of it. He kept thinking about how life had once handed him a chance to help someone he loved, and how he'd looked away too long. He promised himself, sitting there in the cold garage light, never again. The next morning, before the sun had fully cleared the ridge, Jack made up his mind. Ellie came into work early, her hair tied back neatly, trying once more to hide the mark near her collar. She was startled to see a line of motorcycles already parked outside, their chrome catching the first light of day. Jack sat at the counter, waiting, a cup of black coffee cooling in front of him untouched. When she approached, he asked softly if she was okay. She nodded quickly, too quickly, her smile trembling at the edges. But then, before she could turn away, he spoke again, not in anger, not in pity, but with a quiet firmness that told her he saw exactly what everyone else had chosen to ignore. And in that silence, she broke. Tears welled up and spilled before she could stop them. Kurt stormed out from the back, ready to shout her down in front of everyone like he always did. The room fell still. The bikers behind Jack straightened in their seats, their presence suddenly heavy and immovable. Kurt's tone faltered as Jack rose and walked toward him, not fast, but with a calm that made the man's arrogance crumble in real time. Jack didn't raise his voice. He simply told Kurt that hurting someone weaker than you didn't make you powerful, it made you pitiful, and everyone in that diner would remember his name for exactly that reason. Kurt tried to protest, but one look at a dozen bikers rising quietly behind Jack made the words die in his throat. He stormed out, cursing under his breath, his pride shattered, the bell over the door rattling behind him. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Ellie turned, her face streaked with tears, and whispered a thank you so faint it barely left her lips. Jack shook his head gently and told her she didn't owe anyone a thank you, she just needed to start again without fear. The diner erupted in quiet murmurs. People who had watched in silence for months now looked ashamed of their own inaction. One old man in a booth by the window stood and clapped softly, and slowly, table by table, others joined until the sound filled the small diner like a heartbeat. The story of what happened at that roadside diner spread through Cedar Hollow by nightfall. The bikers who had once been feared became, almost overnight, a symbol of unexpected kindness. People began to see them differently, less as outlaws passing through, more as protectors who happened to ride motorcycles. Ellie left her job at the diner within the month and found work at a small bakery across town, where the owner treated her with the respect she'd been missing for years. Sometimes Jack would stop by for coffee, not as a rescuer, but as a friend checking in on an old chapter of her life. Each time, her smile reached her eyes. But the most surprising part wasn't what Jack did that morning. It was how it changed him. For years, he'd lived behind walls built from guilt and old loss. Helping Ellie broke something open in him that he thought had sealed shut for good. It reminded him that even the toughest hearts could still show up for someone else. His club brothers noticed the change too. Within a year, they were organizing charity rides for domestic violence shelters, food drives for single mothers, and weekend repair days for elderly neighbors. What started as one quiet act of courage in a roadside diner turned into a movement that reshaped an entire town's opinion of them. One evening months later, as the sun dipped low over Cedar Hollow, Ellie stood outside the bakery and watched a familiar line of motorcycles roll past on Route 9. Jack raised a hand as he rode by, a small, quiet acknowledgement, a bond formed not by words, but by shared humanity. She smiled, her heart full, knowing that sometimes kindness doesn't arrive wrapped in gentle hands. Sometimes it comes roaring in on two wheels, wearing leather, carrying a heart that has known its own share of pain. If this story touched your heart or reminded you that real strength lies in compassion, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner, where we celebrate the goodness that still exists in this world. Before you go, drop a comment below. Do you believe even the toughest people can carry the softest hearts? And as the last light faded behind the ridge, Cedar Hollow remembered that day not for the roar of engines, but for the silence that followed, when kindness finally spoke louder than fear.